Well, welcome, Dave. Welcome to the 21st Century Physio Podcast. It's a real honour to have you on the podcast today. So thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, it was really great to come across your stuff. I think we sort of the worlds must have been colliding at some point. And because I think I stumbled onto your website. I think the very next day you must have stumbled onto ours and purchased a mat. So it was sort of around that sort of some cohesion in the weird and wonderful world, I guess, that brought us together,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
great.
Yeah, no, it was funny that actually, yeah, it was. But yeah, it was, yeah, I think it must have been, yeah, it was the exact same time pretty much, yeah. And yeah, I'm really happy with the mat actually. It's been really good.
No, it's fantastic. That's good to hear. Now, obviously, I've been looking a fair bit into your stuff since I stumbled across it. I'm really intrigued by a lot of the work you've done, you're doing now and that you've done in the past. For the people who don't know you, do you want to give them a bit of a rundown about your career to date and some of the amazing things you've done?
Yeah, yeah. I went into sport straight from uni, which is like the big no-no over here in the UK. It's like going into NHS, do your rotations and stuff like that. So I was lucky, I got an opportunity in with Leeds Rhinos as a student and Bradford Bulls.
Yeah.
Then I went travelling, got a job offer coming back, so I went straight in as the assistant with Leeds Rhinos. Kind of initially split between them and Yorkshire Carnegie, the rugby union side, because they're under the same kind of training ground, and then especially like went over to Leeds Rhinos then pretty quickly to start the next season. Worked my way up there to be the lead physio there, and I left them after about just under 4 years. Went back to Ireland to work with Munster Rugby Union, which is kind of my childhood team and stuff like that. So that was like my dream job, really. Took that, and then my wife, who was my wife at the time, and Ava were still over in Huddersfield, and for a few different reasons, obviously, it was like came back to England, but I got an opportunity to head up the Huddersfield Giants medical team. So that was kind of, I used to live in Huddersfield even when I was traveling to Leeds, and anyone who knows the M62, I don't know if you've experienced it yet, mate, it's just horrific. So the fact that I could just go 10 minutes down the road into the training ground was a breath of fresh air, really. So I spent 3 years with the Giants, and yeah, I was really, really good at that point in my career, which I'm sure we'll talk about, was really refining and almost treating that like a lab, respectfully. That was like my lab where I was just, at that point in my career, I was getting pissed off with. Oh, sorry, are we allowed to swear in this podcast at all? No,
Definitely. We've got plenty of Australians and Irish and English on there. I'm sure they'll be fine with that.
When I get going, I swear a lot, especially in courses. But anyway, and then when I have drink, I'm even worse. But was kind of getting tired of this whole quick fix stuff. Pain coming back and stuff like that, and kind of a Munster, a few guys that were really complex injuries, and I kind of realized I didn't know it all at that point. So then for the 3 years with the Giants, I just like I really was like more focused on getting structure and a system really in place. And by the end of the 3 years, then I was like, I'm pretty happy where my head's at. It's pretty resilient, this system. And a few people and students and stuff were coming to me and were kind of asking for a bit of mentorship. So as I said, I wasn't expecting to still be doing my mentorship at this point, but I started it. I was like, right, I'll see the kind of the reply. Got a good few from Ireland who kind of would know me a little bit anyway.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of grown from there. Now, last year, the England Rugby League team asked me to get involved for the World Cup here, which is an unbelievable experience. So got to go to Sydney mid-season against Samoa, and then obviously the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand was brilliant. An unbelievable experience. And so I'm continuing with that at the moment. And then I'm doing a bit of consulting with Warrington Wolves 1 day a week as well at the moment as well, which is good to kind of keep my hand in the professional sport. And then obviously we've got the clinic here in Huddersfield as well. So so a lot going on, but it's all good.
Where do you find time to sleep?
Yeah, it's it's debatable sometimes. Yeah, I'm working in my sleep sometimes, but you'll know yourself. But yeah, no, it's good. I am trying to get better at the work-life balance. That's one of my big things at the moment. To be honest, I'm working on that hard. You'll know yourself.
I'm exactly in the same boat right at the minute. So You mentioned, you're starting to get some of these complex cases, or you're seeing these short-term gains, but then, people ending up with, similar injuries and those type of things. What do you think you were missing, coming out of university and, you said jump straight into the sporting team world, which is a little bit of a different place to a lot of practitioners who go into, as you said, into hospitals or into private practice. What do you think? Do you think university set you up well? And what skills do you think maybe that they didn't develop as well as they could have, or that you needed to succeed at that level?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. And again, I don't mean any disrespect to lecturers or anyone listening to this, but I don't think they set us up well. And some of my best mates are lecturers now. And they've worked in Prosport and they're in universities, and I'm chatting to them a lot, and they're desperate to try get stuff in, but it's so hard for them because they have to apply, or they have to fit it towards the CSP and the HBC over here in the UK of certain stuff they have to hit. And I think until that stuff changes, the lecturers are stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I don't think it's necessarily their fault, but I think when we're in university, there's a few things. I think there's a false belief that what you get shown in your labs and stuff like that, it's going to work brilliantly with every patient.
Yep.
And the other thing then is we just treat the side of pain. And I think therapists and new grads especially, they get a big shock, and it's quite overwhelming when you go into the real world and you do what you were taught, and there's not much change, or the pain experience moves, or they feel okay, and then it comes back again, and it's the structure and the thorough understanding, I think, is lacking a little bit there. And like everything, you need exposure to it, and you need to start developing your own way. But I think that was the big thing for me anyway, that I think I was lacking. And I was very lucky to have a really good mentor starting out, like Myron Jones, who's in Melbourne at the moment. Obviously, I mentioned him with Melbourne Storm, but he kind of he showed me the value in soft tissue work. He showed me the value in people getting strong. He showed me the value in looking at the whole body and the kinetic chain. So for me not to be sidetracked, as I call it, into getting into bad habits, that was very, very valuable for me. And I think that like I'm really, really grateful for that opportunity, because that just kept me, I think, in my opinion, on that right road from day one, really, without kind of going down and developing kind of bad habits. And again, to define the bad habits, it might be a little bit tricky. And again, I appreciate that's a bit of opinion, but if that makes sense. So I think the confidence, clarity, and structure, I don't think is there when we leave uni. And that's the thing I think we need to work hard on. And that's the thing I've been striving for, and I'm continuing to try improve my clarity and structure in my system, really,
Yep, fantastic. Well, you mentioned your system. You spent sort of 3 years developing it and sort of refining it. A bit of a test lab with some of the guinea pigs there. The sports teams.
All sorts thrown at them.
So what does the system involve? Because I noticed, you're big on that with your academy.
Yeah. So for me, and the value of my academy and my mentorship, I always say to people, it's not the techniques, it's not the exercises and stuff like that. It's the understanding and the clinical reasoning. And I think there's a massive issue in our profession with. Sorry, I don't want to steal your thunder with questions maybe later, but I think clinical reasoning, it's a big thing that we need to improve on as therapists. And not only that, but just common sense and logical progressions, I think is something that we need to get a lot better at, myself included. But for me, it's all about linking the injury history, or the person's story, as we call it. And again, I know Peter O'Sullivan over there, he talks a lot about the story, and I kind of came across the story from a sports psychologist that I worked with. And then it was nice when a lot of different people are looking at it from different ways, and they're using the same terminology. And I like story, because story usually is somebody who becomes a hero. And I think what a lot of therapists do is they try to be the hero, but actually we're the guide in helping that patient get to where they want to go. So that's kind of how I look at it now, is in we need to understand that patient's story. And we've got physical stressors that I call these, which is previous injuries, but we've also got emotional stressors, which is the stress of daily life and the reactions that happens on the respiratory system, on the heart rate, on many systems that I don't understand in depth. So it's kind of appreciating how that might come through into your objective assessment. So when you're looking at your objective assessment, you're starting to make sense of the story. as opposed to just going through the motions with the subjective and then, just flying through the objective. And especially if you kind of go back to new grads, the amount of students that I've just got a guy on placement here at the moment, and not necessarily him, but especially with the Giants, where they'd run through the objective assessment and they've toe touched, they've backward bend, they've twisted, and I haven't even processed what I'm looking at with the toe touch, and they've moved on to the next test, and that's me 7-8 years later trying to work it out. I'm just like, just step back, relax, and just look and try to make sense of his movement strategies. What's he avoiding loading? What's maybe he loading too much? And just starting to make sense of the story, really, rather than trying to have a diagnosis based on one specific test, So that's kind of the first bit. And then kind of as my objective goes on, then it's more about just kind of going a little bit deeper into it and seeing maybe more of the reactions of the nervous system. So again, why someone got decreased hip internal rotation, asking that question, why does this person have that, and how does that fit with their story versus somebody else who has it? And again, not going to not jumping straight into to release that, but actually, stepping back and going, well, maybe if I can try get the true stressor, will that hip internal rotation change pretty quickly? And a lot of times we find that happens. I'm sure you guys definitely will as well. And then the last bit then is understanding, and this fits nicely with your stuff, and this is what really attracted me to your stuff, is what directions of force, as I call this, the person struggling to tolerate load. And very often we'll see, someone who's got an Achilles or a recurrent calf tightness or something like that in one plane of motion, but actually in another plane of motion, they've got like a perceived treadle to me, where the nervous system is not happy to load these tissues in that direction, because obviously a muscle, different fibers of the muscle is going to contract in depending on the direction that the load needs to happen in. So that got me really interested. That was the missing link for me, I think. And then by the time I got to the Giants, it was trying to find the directions of force that they weren't using, and then focusing a lot of my rehab on that. So my hands-on treatment is desensitizing tissues maybe that are contributing to the pain experience, but a lot of my rehab, kind of the 80-20, 80% of my rehab then is giving back the body's ability to tolerate loads in the directions that they're missing, really. And once we have those that bit of information from the objective, then it gets very easy, because the my hands-on work, it's the start my loading. So it's putting a load through the tissue, not saying making massive claims about scar tissue or any crap like that. I'm simply putting a load through tissue, getting the nervous system to tolerate that load on a very local level. Then the rehab we can build out from that, so we can get the synergies to fire together. We can get the nervous system to self-organize and start to load them through that progressive pathway, which again, you guys will do. It looks like you do a lot of similar stuff to myself. And then as I kind of mentioned to you as well, having that common sense step-by-step progressive pathway, really, where you're just increasing the load every session. You understand where your exercise fits into where you're at with the patient and how that gets into the end goal. And I think a lot of therapists that I see, especially when they come into my mentorship, they're working session to session, where their heads down, they're treating the person in a session per session, but there's no long-term plan of where they're trying to get to. And that's kind of my thing is after that first session, is you kind of realize, okay, they need to be hitting this at session 2, session 3, session 4, and that's really important in pro sport as well, because that's ultimately the thing that's going to give you the prognosis of when they're going to be back training, or when they're potentially going to be ready to play, really. And I was very lucky, obviously, to have exposure to that from an early age, whereas a lot of therapists don't have that exposure, where there's no pressure on them to answer these difficult questions. Sorry, I've rambled. I'll do that a bit. I hope that answers the question.
No, I think that's awesome. I think it's a very similar approach to what we use at Matt. No one would be surprised to hear me say that, I think. And I really like that approach, with the story, and allowing people to you to help them along with their story, but make them be that star character. I get to play that star role and empower them to get back to where they want to be. For us, we talk about their individual needs, wants, or goals. Like, what's the big thing that's driving them to come to you? What are they striving to get better towards? So I think that's a really important thing. I really like your approach of manual therapy. There's still a place for it. I think a lot of people, when they start to talk about that biopsychosocial model, tend to get very much, we're either in that psychosocial, we're very much, just talking and, working through that model. A lot of people are working through the biomechanical model. Sounds like you're, blending that model together, which is awesome.
Yeah, definitely, and there's a place for it all, really, in my system anyway, definitely, and I think it's a shame that people are going one or the other really nowadays, and I think if you can get that blend and you pick your patient in terms of what they actually need to progress to the next level, then everything's fair game, and once you don't have that person lying on the bed for an hour and you're just treating soft tissue, you're not going to get them becoming reliant on soft tissue. My assessments and treatment are very, very interactive. I'm treating a person with hands-on for maybe 2-3 minutes, then they're up, they're doing something, we're reassessing, and we're breaking it down like that for 2 or 3 kind of blocks within the half hour that we have with the patient, or however long. So it's a very, very active session, but the hands-on work's still a very important part, and that really allows me, I'm not going to say an opportunity window, that's a stupid term, but it's the starting point for me in the graded exposure, is that loading of that tissue. That it's as simple as that, and it allows me to get to the next level in my return to play, and the exercise allows me to get to the next level, and then the progression allows me to get to the next level, and then once we keep going, we're going to get to that ideal outcome, like you mentioned,
Yeah, and hopefully have it, someone with a lot of confidence as well, which is often the thing that we don't develop in a lot as therapists. I think we're okay at loading the tissues a little bit. We're okay at maybe educating some people on pain, but actually building that confidence and giving them that ability to return to what they want to do. Sometimes I think we leave that a little bit short. So I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think our confidence is, as well, as massive in terms of. Like I think I put this on an email before, but like what your physiology is saying versus your words. You have to completely believe that person's ready to do the next progression, and they need to believe that you believe. And I think sometimes we'll say, yeah, do that, and then your physiology is saying something completely different, and then people wonder why patients aren't adherent to our exercises and buying in and stuff like that. And I think like our confidence is going to build confidence in the patient, if that makes sense.
Yep. Definitely. I think having a good assessment, which you've stressed is highly important for you, helps to build that confidence as well. If you can show someone where they're at and you know that they're improving over time, I think that's going to be greatly beneficial as well. So you mentioned you spend a lot of time with your assessment. You said some of those new graduates maybe don't have those skills, and they're making either some false assumptions or they're not digging deep enough into that assessment. What does your assessment involve with your patients?
Yeah, so
athletes?
my assessment is very, very simple. It's not a lot of special tests or anything like that, to be honest, unless there was a big mechanism, with a knee or something like that. Obviously we'd need to check the special test. The shoulder, it's like, with the greatest respect, the majority of the time it's a waste of time. The amount of guys that I've seen with slap tears and all sorts of issues, and they're absolutely fine is crazy. But for me, it's all about seeing how the body's adapted. So I will do a generic touch your toes, bend back, reach your hand down your left leg, reach your hand down your right leg, twist. And what I'm looking for is any protective kind of strategies that they're using where they're not maybe happy to load tissues. So again, if I reach my hand down my left leg, is my hip happy to go right, to challenge my base of support, to keep my center of gravity between my base of support? If it's not, then I'm asking why. Why is this person not happy to load these tissues at the moment? How does that fit into their subjective assessment? And then also, I still think peripheral tissues are important. I appreciate central nervous system's the king, but I think the interaction between the two, now I don't think you can split the two, one or the other. I think there's a massive interlink there, but I think the peripheral tissues, what maybe aren't doing their job, I think has a massive impact on maybe where the person feels pain experience. So for instance, if someone was getting pain at the very start of a toe touch versus someone that was getting a pain experience at the end of a toe touch, there's different tissues that are going to be maybe active in those parts of the movement. So again, if someone has back pain at the start of the movement, should the low back tissues really be, tolerating a majority of the load at this point, which presumably or potentially may have contributed to that pain experience? Well, what should be doing its job at that point? So one of the first things we have to do when we touch our toes is we need to slouch. So our rib cage needs to depress, our diaphragm needs to lengthen, our intercostals at the back need to lengthen. So again, that's where we might start to see the emotional components of that person with a sensitized respiratory system, their mouth breathing. They've really lost the ability to shorten and lengthen that diaphragm through its normal range of motion, maybe. So is this now what we're seeing with their toe touch, a strategy of the stresses they've had in their life? And again, with this stuff as well, all I'm trying to do is give the body back what it once had. It's not about, trying to retrain the diaphragm or any of that stuff. It's just trying to get that diaphragm to go through a full range of motion and let the nervous system figure it all out, because every situation, every environment is different. And a lot of this is happening at a subconscious level anyways, and the breathing stuff, it's an interesting conversation as well. And it's all well and good doing a breathing retraining in the clinic where you're nice and safe, but when the person's out in the real world and their boss is coming towards them, what's the first thing that's going to happen? Their heart rate's coming up, their breathing rate's changed again, so I don't think it's as simple as maybe we like to think it is, but just doing that kind of generic appraisal, I suppose, of what maybe they're not loading, what's maybe doing too much work. And again, it's the usual suspects are the guys taking the blame. So, and I'll always say that to the patient as well, is, and this kind of fits into the pain science a little bit, is I'll say to them, well, the good news is I think your back's doing a great job for you. I think it's doing a lot of work for you at the moment, because maybe these tissues aren't doing enough work. And that's really quite powerful, I find, is because it breaks their belief system straight away of, my back's weak, it needs core exercises and all this stuff. And once they understand that, their relationship to it is a little bit different. And then I'll use pain as an opportunity to go, if you have a pain experience, then potentially you're maybe using these tissues a little bit. Let's go back and try change that strategy a little bit. So that can be quite powerful. But then once we've done that I've skipped a little bit there. But once we get back to the objective, then looking at passive assessment, I think the passive assessment is very powerful. If someone's got decreased hip internal rotation in supine, but they've got full hip internal rotation in prone, there's different tissues shortening and lengthening depending on the assessment, So we can get a lot of valuable information from the basic test that we were taught at university. But I suppose it's more that critical higher level thinking that we probably want to try do now. And again, step back, take a breath, and start to ask yourself questions. Why is their hip decreased in internal rotation supine, but he's got full internal rotation in prone? And then, as I said, the ability to develop tension or build tension is then the final bit. So I've kind of got 8 tests that I'll do for the lower limb, and just very, very simple tests. I'll put a perturbatory force through the tissue and see how the person reacts to that. Can they actually develop an isometric contraction between the hamstring, the gastroc, the glute, and the rec fem? Can they co-contract at the knee at a very low level on the bed? And again, that gives me a nice starting point then, because if they can't do it there, then if I go up onto my feet quite quickly and they get pain, etc., I've kind of don't know what it is. Whereas if I can get them an ability to do that at low level, then take them up onto their feet, then if they get pain, I go back, check the previous level. Have they still kept that? So again, is it an increased loading issue with the tissue, or is it that they just don't have an ability to work that hamstring isometrically in the first place? So we can kind of then start to get that stepping stone where we can recheck our work. And if someone does have pain, then it's just a simple regression to the previous level. And we probably haven't got their nervous system to tolerate loading at that level enough before we've progressed. So for me, it's just about step by step of kind of clinically reasoning what peripheral tissues may contribute to the pain experience, do our best to desensitize them, do our best to tolerate loading to those tissues, but also, most importantly, tolerate 80% of my loading is the tissues that maybe aren't doing a good enough job, that's maybe causing the area of the body to have excessive load and ultimately a pain experience,
Yeah. So when you say they're not doing a good enough job, you said you sort of do some perturbations and that type of thing. What else do you do to sort of stress those tissues to find out, if they're not, pulling their weight, I guess?
Yeah, so like a basic manual muscle test, really. But for me, it's not about how that is more about what I'm interested in. That is the journey to the isometric contraction. So again, I'll see kind of two to three strategies, really. Someone will use a high threshold strategy, and they'll kind of, I'll be pushing maybe 20-30% of my max voluntary contraction, and they're using 100%. So I'll take that with a pinch of salt. I'll say, okay, that's great. but just meet my pressure, and all I want to do is, do they have a energy, not energy expensive, energy efficient way of matching the load that I put through the body? Can they self-organize to figure that out? And very often when we test them at sub-maximal loads, they'll have a decreased motor output, basically. So they can't self-organize from the spinal cord level to the peripheral tissue to meet the demands of the perturbator load. And then obviously the higher centers can that get involved and figure it out. And sure, if we keep doing it, we're going to get that coordination back eventually. But I suppose the big question in my mind at that point is why have they lost that in the first place? So the sensory information going up to the spinal cord, what's been affected that's caused that reaction? And again, that's where we'll go back to the previous injuries. So again, a scar, from surgery, the amount of receptors in the skin there from that scar, has that influenced it? Has some kind of protective tone, which I appreciate that's a bit of a vague term, but is there still some kind of adaptation from a previous injury that's influencing the sensory information going up to the spinal cord, really? So anything like that, it's fair game for me, really. I'm just again, I'm coming up with a working hypothesis and I'm trying my best to disprove it. And if it's starting to make sense to me and it starts to make sense to their injury history, it's decreasing their pain experience, it's increasing their range of motion, we've given back the body movement options, then it's brilliant, So I'm not too worried on a diagnosis. It's just, for me, it's all about giving back the body what it once had, and once you focus on that, it gives you a lot of freedom. Because you're not trying to do a specific thing, or you're not trying to isolate a specific structure. And once we get them out of fight or flight, and once we give them back options, magic things happen, really. Pain starts decreasing very, very quickly, and the person starts moving completely different, And again, was it a strength issue? Not really, because, I've changed the motor output in 2 seconds there. So for me, that was, nervous system and just having that ability to coordinate again.
Yep. Definitely. And so when you do start moving into those exercises that you do give them to take home, like what sort of things are you giving them after you sort of, identify these things?
Yeah. So again, session 1 would be a very low level loading of the tissues. So again, it may be some kind of movement where they're working up to a glute bridge. So I'm big into isometric contractions all the way through the rehab, including standing. But again, it's not a maximal isometric contraction. It's getting that sensory awareness back through these tissues, showing the nervous system that it's safe to tolerate these loadings. So we're integrating a lot of breathing with these isometric contractions. We might do that on the bed. And then usually what I'll do is I'll get them in standing, and then that's where I'll start to go into the 3D movement, and I'll give them the exact same type of loading, but in standing. So it's just, that's the next progressive loading of those tissues. So again, it's the same direction, isometric into the standing. And again, it's all about, for me, it's the intent is the big thing, really, because we, from a movement point of view, we've got an intent, and then all the different layers will self-organize to achieve that. So that's kind of where the 3D movement stuff's really, really nice, because you can just give them a task, and we can get these tissues to activate subconsciously, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think when you think about those principles in neuroplasticity, that makes sense too. You're going pretty specific with what you want to do. You're going specific to the direction, specific to that task which that individual needs to do. And you mentioned focus, which I think is a key thing, which again, I think a lot of physiotherapists prescribe exercises and the patient doesn't really have to think about doing them. Whereas we know from the principles of neuroplasticity, intensity in that focus is actually really important to create some of those neural changes too, so neural adaptation. So I really like that approach.
Massive. And I think that's a massive thing as well, Stephen, with buy-in, is if the exercise, especially with athletes, if the exercise is challenging, it's hard. And even like with the breathing stuff, I get a lot of people say, oh, they won't buy into my breathing exercise and stuff like that. If you challenge someone to slow down their inhalation through their nose and take 10 seconds to inhale through your nose slowly, a lot of athletes will find that challenging. Then you'll get the buy-in, because they want to naturally they want to beat the next guy, or they want to problem solve, and that's the biggest difference really from my experience with pro athletes versus amateurs. Is pro athletes can problem solve very, very quickly, and then that's really good for us, because we can progress into the next level quite quickly then in the loading. But yeah, these exercises, if you're on the true stressor, they are mentally exhausted after 6-7 reps, because you're putting them in a position where there's a perceived stress to the nervous system. That's very cost effective in terms of energy and resources that they're using. Now, we don't want to take them too far into fight or flight when they go rigid and they're maybe not moving in a relaxed manner like we want to. But we always want to be somewhere between that fight or flight and rest and digest. And I think a lot, and especially for new grads, your patient is showing you the signs of where they're at, but you just need to open your eyes and start looking for them. Like, are they holding their breath? Are they going rigid through the rib cage? Are they going rigid through their foot? These are all signs that person's starting to go a little bit too far into fight or flight, and maybe we need to repress them a little.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think you make some really important points there. It looks like you picked up some nice things from that elite sport and brought it back into your practice as well. What other things do you think you learned along the way from elite sport, that has helped you in private practice that you think some other physios out there could benefit from?
Yeah, like every single patient, like at Prosport Physio, we treat them with the exact same system. It's just how long we might spend at a particular level, or the amount of loading we might do may change. So for a runner, we're going to definitely be doing a lot of hopping, whereas for someone who wants to pick their grandkids up, we still want good co-contractions at the knee, but we want them to be able to extend at the hip and be relaxed in the rib cage and the lumbar spine, obviously, when they're lifting. So that's where we might start to put external load on them. So that system is the same, really. It's just all about tolerating load through the tissues that you need to be able to tolerate load and be resilient to be successful in life, really. So there's no difference for me, to be honest, mate, with the two. In terms of lessons learned from Prosport, that's a good question, and I've never really thought about that before, to be honest with you. Lessons learned. I think it's probably just getting that clarity in the system, the return to play system, and putting that into the private practice is probably the biggest thing, really, of actually treating private practice patients like professional athletes, and this is a big thing in terms of, just because, and this is our biggest challenge in the clinic, which again you might ask me that, is once that pain is gone, it's getting the patient to understand that just because the pain's gone, we still need a little bit more work to do in terms of building resilience to these movements, so that you can be successful in life, and that's a big challenge for us in the clinic sometimes, and that's something I work a lot on, and I'm dissecting a lot of why maybe some people can't grasp that and aren't willing to invest that extra session. And obviously when you've money changing hands and stuff like that, it's complicated, a little bit complicated, but I think people see the value in going that extra couple of sessions. And in pro sport, just because the athlete's paying free now doesn't mean he goes straight back training. He has to go through his sets of reconditioning and tempo runs or whatever you're using to make sure that he can tolerate these loads at these speeds. And that can be challenging for private practice patients, but slowly we're starting to kind of, I suppose, educate them on the benefits of that extra session or two, which hopefully will provide fruit for, when they're in times of increased stress under heavy loads in real life,
Definitely. And I think hopefully now, as you've got the mat in there, some objective data definitely helps with that as well, being able to show patients something tangible, whether they can see, look, there is still some imbalances there. We still know from the literature, that you're this much more likely to potentially get an injury down the track. You shouldn't be returning back to sport until you get less than this number. All of a sudden, it gives them some clear cut-off points and some objectivity, and gives them some goals to reach as well. So we found that's been really successful for us. And for lots of our mat users around the world, to help get people back to 100%. Because I think we talk about people often, they come into people at a level of dysfunction. I don't really like that word, but a point in time where things aren't going all that well, and we want to get them back to 100% to that level of performance, whatever it is, whether it's a sporting field or playing with their grandkids. But I think physiotherapists traditionally only take people so far along that road. They don't often get them back to that last 15-20%. And whether that's through the physiotherapist not pushing them hard enough, or whether it is the patient just starts to feel better and they start to drop off their management plans. So I think objective data, as you start to use the mat, hopefully that might help out too.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that's probably, you've probably answered my question there in terms of using that more in the private practice as well with athletes and stuff like that, and the return to play objective markers. We obviously use a lot with pro athletes, but yeah, we and our clinic's probably definitely up to now being guilty of not using those with patients, which obviously your guys' maths is awesome first. So yeah, that's probably, you probably answered my question there
Good.
with the objective markers. Yeah.
Glad to help. Now, tell us about your return to play course, because you've obviously got a few of those coming up. What do you look for when you're working with your athletes before they get back onto the sporting field to make sure that they're safe and robust enough to be able to tolerate the forces on the field?
Yeah, so just once they can go through the step-by-step, I suppose, loading, and I'm doing a big lit review at the moment here, and really just trying to put it all together in terms of justifying every single step, really. And we're getting there slowly with it. But more really making sense of the literature and having a common sense progressive loading. And, it's logical, it's step-by-step. If they can't, just because someone can lunge pain-free doesn't mean they can run. The force is going through the system. It's chalk and cheese. So it's filling the gaps there so that we can go through. And again, the hopping stuff's really valuable for me in terms of bridging that gap. And again, even the different subsystems within my hopping, that we'll do to get them to the higher level hopping. But once they can do the higher level hopping, the ground reaction forces they're tolerating there compared to running, we've actually super maximally loaded them. So that's the thing that gives me confidence to say, you've done this, you've got no reactions in terms of swelling, no decreased range of motion, no other adaptations the nervous system may put down, right, I think you're ready to run. So, and almost taking them to that level where we've got, we can't literally do any more from, so that's the time then when I've justified to myself, okay, you're ready to run. And that doesn't take a long time. You can do all that within one session, as you guys, I'm sure, see. But it's just having that common sense step-by-step plan. And that's ultimately what my return to play system is. And there is exercises in there, but it's more about understanding and really having that common sense structure. That's what my return to play is all about, really, and applying it in the real world with real people. And that's something that I think, your maths is brilliant for that, as well as you can straight away, your course is going to show people how they can use it. And I think that's something where I'm very, very conscious. Everything on my mentorship, it needs to be able to apply in the real world. My mentorship is not a master's in terms of, we're going to, obviously the research is there if people want it, but it's more about implementation. That's the key things. That's the thing that's going to get results ultimately at the end of the day, when you apply it.
Yeah, definitely. And you said you've been reading a lot of research over the last couple of months. Are there any particular papers you found, particularly interesting? Yeah,
there's a good one. Again, you guys, you've probably read it. There's a paper prior et al. It's about the I can't remember the name actually. Sorry,
I'll put in the link to the podcast. That's okay.
Yeah, the influence of changes in trunk and pelvic posture during single leg standing on hip and thigh muscle activation on a pain-free population. So yep. I don't know if you've read that. Absolutely. So that's really, really interesting paper in terms of I suppose making sense of the 3D stuff and kind of almost being able to go, yeah, I kind of knew that, but it's nice to be able to see that what we were kind of seeing, and also for therapists to make sense of, okay, well, if I reach forward with my hands, that's going to put a bit more load through the hamstring. Brilliant. If I reach above, it's going to put a bit more load through rec fem or whatever. So I think that's going to give therapists a lot of clarity in kind of using these movements and intent and what we do with our hands, what we do with our feet, and some of the reactions that's happening in the body, so that we can give the nervous system a task, and we can be pretty confident that these tissues are going to be activating in these scenarios, so I'm really excited to see where that research goes and if anyone builds on that research. And I think that's the kind of research that's going to be really valuable to therapists in helping them make better decisions and clinically reason the type of movements that they're going to do.
I actually really love reading that paper. It fits some of my biases pretty nicely, but it also made me think back to some people that I've learned a lot with at the Gray Institute. I'm not sure if you've heard about them out of the USA, but they've been talking about that sort of stuff for 30 years, and it's actually nice to see, they're sort of saying, why is everyone lying on their back to train TA? If you start to then, reach up and do these type of things in all three dimensions, that's going to be, you get a lot more activation than lying down on your back and trying to, suck your belly button in, and much more functional as well.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I was getting at. Is I've done a lot of their online stuff, and that was a big influence on me on my return to play stuff as well, in putting it all together from bed to high end stuff. And then obviously I started to integrate a lot of the Franz Bosch stuff, kind of prior to that as well. But that paper is brilliant, and that's the stuff, that's the kind of stuff that I think new grads should be reading, because it's stuff that's actionable and we can apply it. Whereas some of the research, it overwhelms people, and then we don't take action. And same with patients. If we give them an exercise, they don't understand it, it's too difficult, they get overwhelmed, they don't do the exercise, and the papers like that I think are really, really good. And again, when we look at any of the motor adaptations, the pain and noxious stimulus papers, like Kylie Tucker and Paul Hodges are doing really good stuff up in Queensland. That's the stuff that's really, really interesting, where we see what happens to the body when there is pain or noxious stimulus, how the body adapts to that and takes forces away from the areas, and again, what you're seeing now is that just a reaction to how the body's adapted from the previous injury or the previous injury, and stuff like that's really, really, like, they're really good papers to be reading that and stuff, for new grads to start to understand movement and understand, human behavior, I suppose, really. And those kind of papers, I think, give a lot more than they do, a lot more good than harm. And I think some papers can overwhelm therapists a lot, and almost cause us to stop in our tracks.
Definitely, and create whole industries. Some of that early stuff from Hodges and Hyde and those guys, ended up with everyone doing those TA and VMO exercises and those type of things. Whereas I think now that they've been interpreted the right way and more research is coming out, especially putting it together with the central nervous system, I think it's all, it's an interesting space and something I'm definitely interested in as well.
Massively, yeah.
There's obviously a lot of physios out there who want to follow a similar pathway. So you did get into that elite sport. What are some advice you'd have for people to get into it? What are some of the things you enjoyed about it, and what are some of the things that maybe you didn't actually enjoy that much about it too?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you have to be willing to work hard. You have to be willing to be obsessed. To be honest with you, it's a night and day job, and you need to be willing to put the work in. And when I first started, I was in at, leaving the house at 6, I was in for 6:45. I was getting back at 9, 10 at night, but I loved every minute of it, so it didn't matter. And then I'm reading in the evenings. I'm reading on Saturday, Sunday, just trying to learn more. And I think because the sport environment, especially in rugby, anything could be thrown at you at any given time, and you can't know it all. So you have to be constantly kind of on your toes with it. There's a lot of unsociable hours. So again, that's where you have to be obsessed and loving it, because if you don't, you're going to get a little bit disgruntled pretty quickly. But it's very, very high pressure as well. I think people need to be aware of that, and some people aren't built for it, or certainly they're, it's probably an environment that, it's going to be very, very challenging, and you need to be aware of that. It's a high pressure environment. There's mistakes being made, and if you make a mistake, there's consequences, and especially like in the World Cup as well, the media are on our backs, and like fucking, they don't know half of what's going on, but they'll put stories out there, and then you'll have other people commenting on what you're doing, and they don't know shit, and that can be quite frustrating as you go up the level. And I actually put a blog on that with hamstring injuries. I think it was like Liverpool had a lot of hamstring injuries 3-4 years ago. It's like everyone was giving their tuppence. I'm like, you've no idea what's going on behind the scenes at a pro sport club. So I just think it's really disrespectful for therapists to all of a sudden, be an expert in something that they've no idea what's going on behind the scenes. There's so many factors anyway, so be ready for that.
It's especially easy with social media these days.
Exactly, and even like, I think that's one of the things as well, that as a new grad, you have to be respectful. I think it's brilliant that therapists are challenging beliefs and stuff like that, but at the same time, you have to be respectful of therapists and where they're coming from and their experiences that they've had when they say some stuff on social media. Whereas I see a lot of new grads now, and they're hammering these people who've been in the trenches and done things. And yeah, maybe they need to update their belief system a little bit, or maybe they need to maybe change what the terminology that they're saying or something, but at the same time, they were getting results. So, instead of bastardizing and call them out, they actually ask the question, well, okay, maybe that's why they think they're getting the results. Why are they getting these great results that they've got and stuff like that? And, I think for new grads, you need to be respectful and humble, and kind of work your way into it. So don't come in and be cocky and outgoing. Take a step back, see how people interact, get to know the personalities in sport, and then start to kind of come out of your shell a little bit rather than going into it full guns blazing. Because as I said, first impressions are massive in pro sport. And if the coach don't like you, it doesn't matter how good a physio you are, or the captain or one of the senior players think you're cocky and they don't like you, that's going to have a big impact on your results ultimately at the end of the day. And stuff like that's important as well. And I think the best therapists that work in sport are therapists, I think, that are certainly in rugby that I've seen, are therapists that have been involved in sports themselves, and they just know how to handle themselves in group situations. Because it's, if you're taking a pre-ab group and stuff like that, you have to be able to communicate, and players aren't going to be thinking about pulling their TVA in or anything like that. They're not going to give a crap about squeezing glutes. They're having a chat to their mate, and it's, can you keep their attention? Can you have authority in that situation and stuff like that? So there's a whole host of skill sets that you haven't even been tested on yet, in university going into sport. So it's just being aware of that. And again, I don't want to put people off by that, because it's the most rewarding thing in the world, like being in Suncorp Stadium for the World Cup final in November. That was probably the highlight of my career. Like the police escort, you're in the bus. It's just like there's nothing better than that. You're in the dressing room, your adrenaline shaking, you can barely strap ankles. It's the best feeling in the world. But it took a long time to get to that level. And, the first year or two was head down, do your job, work the hours, put in the effort, have respect, learn, ask questions, and get to that point. Whereas I see a lot of therapists these days, they want it all very quickly. They want a lot of money. They don't want to work weekends. They don't want to work evens. It's like, fucking hell. You need to work your way up the ladder here, a little bit. And the therapist, if you want it badly enough, you'll make it. I'm a big believer in that. If you're a good person, you're in it for the right reasons, you'll get to where you want. Definitely, you just need to, you need that lucky break. But when the break comes, you have to take it as well. That's really important. And that your actions and your behaviour up to that point is going to dictate when that opportunity comes, whether you take it or not.
Yeah, and I like that. I had a similar conversation with Luke Fuller a couple of podcasts ago, where he was talking, you can learn from everyone. Even if you don't 100% agree with everything they're saying, there's always something that you can learn from someone, especially someone who's been out for a lot longer. Even if they maybe aren't, what you term up to date with the latest research, there's always some, clinical gold that you can learn from them.
Massively. And there's always a reason why it's working. And again, once we ask ourselves that and we keep an open mind, you will get something. And even those therapists, their mannerisms, how they behave in front of coaches and players, there's stuff like that. Like, it's just gold, and that was something I was really lucky to be mentored at with Myron from an early age, is how to speak to coaches, and just watching him, how he's dealt with the situation, how he's diffused when a coach is coming down, storming into the physio room, demanding answers. And, that stuff, it's absolute gold. And some experienced therapists, they're in this level of sport for a long time because of those skill sets, and that's a massive part of pro sport as well.
Definitely, very, very much so. Now, I've still got a full sheet of paper here with questions to ask you, but I'm aware that I've taken up a lot of your time today. So what I think we'll have to do is maybe we'll catch up on a podcast, or maybe we'll have to catch up over a pint of Guinness when I'm over there in a month or two running some of that courses. Sure. And we'll pull the microphone out after see how that how the language evolves over a couple of pints, and and we'll hopefully get some more gold out of it, because I think we've barely scratched the surface. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the 21st Century Physio podcast, Dave. Anything you'd like to say to everyone listening before we finish up?
What's that? Sorry about?
I said, any last advice for the people listening before we finish up?
Yeah, just keep going, keep learning. And as I said, if you know what you want to do and you know where you want to be, then you'll make it. If you want it enough, and you're willing to put the time in, you will make it. And I'm a prime example of that. I had a goal and I achieved that goal through hard work and stuff like that. And I think if you put your head down, you'll make it absolutely in pro sport or whatever setting you want, you know.
Great advice. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for joining the 21st Century Physio podcast. I'll look forward to chatting again shortly.
Cheers, mate.